Hi, this video is about how are we going to make a controller talk to the user interface. So if you watched the other videos, you already saw how I created this program that I have running right now, which consists of an anchor pane with a text box and a button that doesn't really do anything. They can't do anything right now, nothing happens. I can fill them out, so the basic functionality is there, but nah, they're not really doing anything. I can close the program, of course, minimize, maximize, resize, all this stuff. This is basic functionality that you get out of the box. But what if we actually want to do something with that? That's kind of so first thing I want to show would be something like, what if I want to change the title of the program dependent on the text in here? So if I click this nice button here, it would put this text up here. How would I go about doing that? So there are different ways, but let's try to close the program and then look into it. So right now we have a button here, and the button only defines right now what it looks like. It doesn't define how to talk to the controller. There are different ways to do that. We can do that programmatically. We can see we can do different things in here. There's something called on key press. Um, we would want to use something called on action here, but I'll show that from within Scenebuilder instead because it's much easier to do that. So let me show you. So it's the button that I want to do something. So if the button should do something, I should make what we call an event on the button. So in the event that someone clicks the button, we want something to happen. So I choose the button inside of my scene builder, and I want to go into the thing here called code. And it's very important that you defined in controller that you defined the name of the class in Java that you wanted to use. I'm using sample because it's in the package sample dot controller because the name of the class is controller. We can call it anything. We can use any package we want. In this case, it's just to show, but it's just important that you have that here. Otherwise, nothing will work. So you also have to know that in order to make a button work, you have to use the on action. So when you click a button, this is the on action event. There's a lot of different events you can do on a button, like key presses, mouse dragging, entering, exit. So if you go over it with the mouse, it does something. When you go away, it does something. All those kinds of stuff. So these are all different kinds of events that has to do with swipes and touches and zoom and rotation and all these things that you can do as a human to actually interact with the program. But let's start with the easy one. So you would think that when I click the button, it has to do with the action of mouse click, right? So we see mouse clicked. You can use that event, but the problem is not everyone is using a mouse. Some people use the keyboard for navigating. Some people use a touch screen. Then they're not using a mouse, they're using a touch screen. Some people are handicapped in some way. So if we use the action, then any trigger like a mouse click or a click with using the space button or enter button or whatever, that would be correctly stated as doing something with the button. So for button, we always use the on action because it's more general than using the mouse click. So the on action, what we need to do, we need to define a name in our program for the method that we want to use on action. And we can either define the method first or do it what I think is the easiest way, just write it directly in here. So let's call it click button. So I just call it click button, and I now have an action event called click button. If I save that and go back into my code, I will now see that I put the on action event here, and we have to use the hashtag and then click button. And it's red here. That's very important. Red means there's a problem. It doesn't know about click button. There's nothing called click button in controller. So it expects to be a method inside of the controller that actually reacts to this action, because it will ask this method to do something, but it's not there. So IntelliJ is kind of intelligent here, saying you forgot to define that method. I could either do that manually, or I can get a small help from this nice little red one over here. So I use the top one called create method, click button in the controller, and it automatically creates a public method with the void return type, and it also injects the action event here that so if we need to do something like figure out what did I actually click or something like that, I can find this information in the action event. If I write action event, you can see I can get the type of event, I can get the source, that means what I clicked on. I can do other stuff like consume, get target, all this kinds of stuff. We can look into that at some other point, but right now it's not important. It's just this action event is part of that. We don't need to use that. It's just nice to have right there. So now we have our public click button here. So whatever we do in here, if I write system out print line and I write you clicked a button, then it should print out down here in our text output. It should print out you clicked a button. Let's try to see if we can actually make that work. So I'll run the program, and again I defined in here, I defined the on action. I can see that on action here on the button. So when I click the button now, I can't see anything happening because it's going to the console, and fortunately I can see the console in here. So we can see down here it says you click the button, you click the button. Each time that I click the button, it will call this small method in here called click button. So that's kind of nice. So, but my goal was actually to write something in here and make it write something up here. So first off, we need to figure out how do we change the title of the actual program. So how can we do that? So I think the easiest way is just starting out looking in here and seeing where is the title of the program. Can we find it in here somehow? And we can't actually find it in here, so we need to define it somewhere else. So I think let's first just start out by creating something else, so later on we can actually change the title of our window, because changing the title is not as easy as it might seem, because there's nothing in here that will actually show us enable us to do that. So let's start out with something a bit more simple. So I'll just start out by creating something called a label, which is just a text field that is non-editable by default. So when I run the program now, I will have a small, oh, I forgot to save it. I will have a small label that says label. So now whatever I have here, let's start out just by changing this text here. Okay. So what if I want in here in my controller, now I want to find that label. The problem is that I don't have a name for it. I have to give it a name first. So if I look at label here, we can see it has a text here. If we go into code, there is a special ID field for that. So if I want to give this label a name, and I want to do that because if I want to change this property called text, this is what changes. Woo. If I want to change that, I need to actually do like that, but I want to do it from the program. So I go into my code and I click on my label and I set what is called the FX ID. That is the identifier for that one. So I'll just call it like label. Yeah, label is probably a bad name. Let's call it label out, maybe. Also, I don't like that name. Let's just call it label for now. Okay, so I'll save that, and now it has a name. And we can see that name uh, somewhere. We'll even get a small warning that, did I call it label? I better change that, otherwise I can't label. So now I changed that, and it actually warns me there's nothing called label inside of my controller. Okay, that's because I haven't created it yet. So if I go back into my FXML file, I can see it actually created a label in here, and it put FXID equals label like this. Ah, okay. If I go to my controller, I still can't write a label now, right? Because there's nothing called label. I'll just get an error. A label dot. There's actually a method. Should be a method called set text on that. I can set the text high, but it says it doesn't know about label. But why? I actually created it because we have to let the controller know about it. So just like with the action here, we had the on action click button. We also need somehow to know about the label. So for doing that, we can use this small. Also, again, we use this small thing here called create label, and it will create a label in here, and we can save that. And now we can actually I used label. We can see there's a lot of different things we can do, but one of them is called set text. That will change the text of the label. I'll show you later a nice way to see what you can do with it. Okay, so if I click the button now, it will change it into high because I put high here, right? Nice. And it will still print out here because I'm doing both. So what if I want to change it into the text that I have in this field? If I want to move that text down here, how do I do that? So now I've figured out how to do a label like this. Maybe I want to figure out how to put something value in here dependent on something else. But what is it really depending on? It's depending on this text field. How do I get access to the contents of this text field? If we go to properties, we can see that there's a field here called text, which is empty. If I put something in there, that text will be the default one for that field. So I probably need to do something like give this a name and then use get text instead of set text for getting the text out. So I can kind of guess from this text here that this is what I need to do. So if I go into code and then I give this, I call it txt input, and I save that, and I go back into my program and I see that now the text field also have an FXID, and I do the same thing. I create the field, so now I have the text field as well. So now I can actually write txt input, which is the name of that, and I can say get text, and this will actually give me the text of the input field. So if I were to do something like this and put this into, instead of this, it should write a line with whatever is in this text field to this output down here. Let's look at it. So if I write we, click the button, it writes we down here, which is really nice, but I wanted it to write it here. So you probably guessed what you can do, right? I can take this text input and instead of writing it here, put it directly into the other field like this. And now I can change the text down here into anything that I write up here. So how did I know that I should use set text and get text? Yeah, I know because I've been working with this for some time, but I also know for some other reason that can help you. So if you go in here and you look into, let's say this one, and I know I want to get whatever is inside of it, I go always to properties, and I can see in here that the properties of this text field, there is kind of this one called text, and then there is one called text in here. So if I want to do something with that, I know that I probably need to say get text and set text for this one. Just like if I want to disable or enable something, there's something for that, or change opacity, there's something for that. So I can kind of use this as a lookup to see what can I do with this. So opacity has to do with how invisible it is. Let me show you. So if I put this down to something like this, it will be kind of transparent, right? So if I wanted to change the transparency, for example, by using the opacity, I can see, oh, there's something called opacity here. Let's see if I can find that. And that was on the text input. So I write text input dot, and then I can just look for opacity somewhere. And there's quite a lot, right? So maybe if I just write opacity, so there's something called opacity property like that. So maybe I could use that one, and there's maybe something called set opacity. Yeah, there was actually something to do that. And I can see in here it's a number between 0 and 1. We can see that. So if I want to set it to 0.2, I could do that. So I go back here and I say 0.2. So when I click the button, it gets more opaque, actually, or less opaque, or more transparent. So let's try to do that. So I can click here and write something, and when I click the button, it moves that down here as I told it to, but it also sets the opacity so that it kind of gets more transparent here. So this way, if we want to change any properties of anything, we can kind of look at the name and then try to look for that in the code. Also, there's a little helper here. You see this is actually a link. If I click opacity, boom, I actually get directly into the documentation for JavaFX, and I can see there's something called, so now there's it took me here actually. So there's actually something called set opacity, get opacity, and opacity property. And that is really nicely made. Thank you for that one, Gluon. So whenever I need to do something, let's say I click the button and I want to say, okay, let me change the font. I can just click font, and boom, there is actually get font directly here and set font directly here. I can see the methods here. So I can see if I want to set the font, I need to write set font and then put a font here. And if I don't know what a font is, I can even click that and see, okay, this is a font, this is how I define that. And if I'm still confused, I can look that up, of course, on Stack Overflow or something like that. But it's really nice that you can use these small things here for finding the documentation directly. I like that. So last thing for this video is what I started out with. I really wanted to change the title of the program. So how do I do that? So I could look that up and ask someone or something like that. I know how to do it. I just wanted to show something. So if we look at the structure here, what is called a hierarchy, we can see that everything is in a tree-like structure, just like your folders in Windows here is like a tree structure. It starts with the basic, and we can go further and further and further into these branches here. The same way this is made, the anchor pane has buttons and text fields and labels, and these are called its children. We can also see it in here. So anchor pane has 3 children here, and these children can have children and so forth. Of course, a text field can't have any children, but we could have an anchor pane within an anchor pane within an anchor pane, and this way it could be a child of another anchor pane, stuff like that. So basically we have this structure here, and we can actually we can utilize that to get to uh, the actual scene we're in and the actual stage we're in. Because in JavaFX they call the window, they actually call that the stage, and they call the scenes, these are the content, basically what's inside of this file here is what's going to be inside of the scene. So if we go back here and see like our main method, we're creating something here called a root element, which is called parent, and the parent is really, in this case, um, this is our main scene. And then we have the primary stage. So primary stage is the stage that is created when we create the application. So this is the primary window. So when I open this up, this is the one that I can click here and close and maximize this part up here. And also this is part of that. So how do I actually get into that stuff? I need to use the knowledge that a scene is inside of a stage, and I set it here. And I also need to use the knowledge that everything that is loaded into here, I see here, I can see that the loader will load the FXML file into the scene here, and the scene will be set to the stage. So I kind of need to go find the scene to find the stage that I'm on. So I can do that from my controller. So just to kind of complicate things, in order to find the scene and the stage, we have to go through something that we already know about from the controller that actually has the scene or a stage or something like that, has access to that. And we know that it's a parent in this kind of structure. It's a parent to the things that we set in here. So we could use either the label or we could use the input for getting the scene and eventually the stage. So let me show you. So first off, let's get to the scene. So if I just take the label and I say get scene, I can get the scene like that. That was pretty easy. So this way we know that a label must be on the scene, so we get the scene. But can we get the actual stage from here? Yes and no. If I say get stage, there's nothing called get stage. So we can't get the stage directly, and that has to do with that the scene is not always knowing if it's on a specific stage. So we have to use the one called get window. And because stage is actually a window, we can actually, and we know in this case that this scene is actually on a stage, we can actually get the stage just by saying we know that this is a window. So we use something that we call typecasting. So we can write stage like this, and we get a problem. You see it says a stage, it cannot get a stage directly from a window. But we know that what we are getting when we say get window, it will be actually the stage. So we can use this cast, which we can also call typecast, where we put in parentheses in front of it that we force this window to be a stage. If for some reason that this window is not a stage, the program will crash, and that is actually fine by me. And now we can say stage set title, and then we can change the title into anything we want. And I actually wanted to take the input from the text box, so I put that in here, and now it should change the title, and we kind of solved that little challenge that I set out to do. Challenge accepted, right? And it should write it first. It should write you click the button here, then it should say text input get text, put that text from here down here. Then it should set the opacity of this so that it gets transparent. Then it sets the stage, fetches the stage and sets the title up here. Let's click So now it says challenge accepted, challenge accepted, challenge accepted, and the transparency has been changed on the user interface. So this is basically the most important thing to know when you need to interact with your program. You need to know two things. First, you need to know that you can do events on something. So when clicking or dragging or dropping or whatever you're doing to your user interface, you need to define an event. You need to do it on code. So whenever we want to get interactions from the user, we define events here. We can do the same for this one. We could also do an action event here or some other event. We could do the same here, like if we click this with the mouse, it does something. So it's not just buttons that can have events, everything in here can have events. If we want to change something, we want to access to a specific element on the graphical user interface, we need to give it an ID in order to actually work with it in our controller. So I wanted to change this. That is why this actually has a name. This actually has a name, and look at the button. I didn't give that an ID because I don't want to do anything with the button. The button is kind of the opposite. The button sends something into my controller. It sends a signal that an event happened into the controller, but I'm not changing the button at all. It should just do as if nothing happened. It will click nicely, it will do the default functionality, but I don't need to move the button or anything like that, right? Don't need to do anything like that. So that's why I haven't given the button a name. So that is the two most important lessons. Like, give things a name that you want to change. If you want to change properties or layout or anything, you give it a name. If you want to have these action events or any kind of event, you have to give it this event inside of Scenebuilder, and it will be put in here as an, for example, an on action like this, and the IDs will be put in here by FXID. And last thing is, of course, you need to remember, if you want to use a class like controller, you need to specify the name of the class here. Not the file name, very important. You need to specify first the package, which you can see here, and then the name of the class, which you can see here. Or you can also look over here, it says sample, this is a package, and it says controller. And also important, if you change something, like let's say I think sample is a bad name for my FXML file, you need to be very careful to change it in other places as well. So that's it for now. So maybe at some other point in time I'm going to make some more videos on how to do nice layouts and graphics and stuff like that. But this is just a simple part on how to interconnect them for now.